All right. We are recording. Hey, hey, hey. Well, John, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks
Likewise.
for agreeing this interview. So I love the Bonhoeffer film. Obviously want to talk about it. And one thing I really, really appreciated was how the Christianity in the film was
Hmm.
presented. I kind of liken it to an academic approach.
Hmm.
Bonhoeffer was a pastor slash priest, and so he would go into the pulpit and he would start preaching, and this is what he said. This is what the character did for a profession, and it's presented matter of factly, which to me comes across very disarming for a worldwide audience.
Hmm.
That's not like we're trying to say, okay, I want to hit him with the gospel. I'm going to try to dress it up and make it look good. I need a good intro. Here we go. It wasn't any of that. It was just, this is the character. This is what happened. And I love the way that comes across because, you know, everything's there. So I'm curious how intentional that was. And what are your thoughts on the presentation of the spirituality of the film?
Sure. Well, over the 12 years of making the film, we really immersed ourselves in Bonhoeffer's character and his kind of life and times. Um, our lead producers, in particular, Mano and Camille Campouris, became students of Bonhoeffer. I always say they could probably get PhDs in Bonhoeffer studies at this point. We were also blessed to have Todd Komernicki, our screenwriter director, involved with the project. He's a man of deep faith, passionate Jesus follower. And I think having a man of that caliber as a screenwriter and director uh, doing a deep dive into a character like Bonhoeffer produces a film with a really authentic gospel approach. And there are moments, as you pointed out, where he's preaching from the pulpit or having arguments with his bishop, where things are happening on kind of a high ecclesiastical level. But then there are also moments like the time that Bonhoeffer spends in Harlem, where he's sitting at a dinner table with Reverend Adam Clayton Powell of the Abyssinian Baptist Church and a bunch of his congregants. And Powell's just very candidly sharing his personal testimony. And when he talks about meeting Jesus, Bonhoeffer says, "I want that." And to me, that's a very uh, compelling and in some ways sort of contemporary way of talking about your faith. And I think the two of those approaches together really reflect Bonhoeffer's journey. He was a very highly talented and successful theologian, but he also had a deeply passionate relationship with Jesus, and I think that comes through in the film, in his writings, and in writings about him.
That's excellent. I'm impressed that you spent 12 years making the film and doing research on the
Yeah.
guy. What are some things that you learned about Bonhoeffer that got left out of the film?
So yeah, there are a couple of things that people who've read about Bonhoeffer may have missed, and of course, it's very difficult to take anybody's life and compress it into 2 hours. And if you're someone like Bonhoeffer who lived an amazing life during very tumultuous and eventful times, it's even more of a challenge. Some things that I think come through, but maybe you're somewhat understated, are the fact that he was a very physical guy. He was the kind of guy who'd get in a room and sort of magnetize it by his physical presence. He was an athlete, and we show a little bit of that, him playing soccer on a beach with a bunch of seminary students. But it's hard to convey that fully in the film. The other thing was, of course, there was a famous romance toward the end of Bonhoeffer's life with one of his students that took place entirely through correspondence. It was, relationship that really bloomed through Bonhoeffer's letters and writings. And we struggled with different ways to bring that into the story, but we're never really able to successfully bridge it into a subplot. But his relationship with that student was deeply important to him, but it happened at the end of his life, and it wasn't very cinematic because it was all sort of writing off screen.
Right. That's funny. Um, my favorite scene of the movie easily was when Bonhoeffer discovered jazz,
Yeah,
and he was almost speechless. He was just drawn to that music on stage,
yeah.
and I just thought that was wonderful. What do you want to tell me about that scene and uh, how that was filmed and everything?
Yeah, that was it was really it's really beautiful to watch. It's just very well done. And one of the great things about this movie is, we had the budget and Todd had a script that was so strong that we just brought in these world famous, legends in cinema. Our cinematographer, for instance, was John Matheson, who did the original Gladiator and Gladiator 2, and has worked on a bunch of other huge films and normally doesn't, get out of bed for a film with a budget of less than 200 million. But uh, he loved the script so much that he said, I really need to do this. So you'll see, if you're watching those scenes, you'll see some great little kind of cinematography tricks. There's the shot where you're following Frank Fisher into the bar. And I love the way that's done because you see him sort of turning and talking with different people in the bar and just conveying without words kind of, he's a man in that someone who's known in that club, someone who's familiar with that scene, and he's introducing Bonhoeffer to it for the first time. There's some great 360 shots, during those sequences that were really fun to watch being made, and the whole thing was really fun to watch, being committed to film as someone who was on set. So yeah, it was great to be there. Great to see those scenes, and there's a lot of economy there. We didn't have a huge budget, so we had to shoot stuff on multiple days and multiple sets and try and turn it all into kind of one coherent scene. I think it works really well.
That's great. I liken that falling in love with jazz to that scene that you brought up in reference about how I want that. It's like when he fell in love with Jesus and he fell in love with jazz, or kind of instantaneous things that attracted him and pulled him in. I thought it was
Yeah.
really acted well, and you guys did a great job presenting that.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. That whole Harlem scene or sequence is just one of the highlights of the film. I agree with you. It's really compelling.
Yeah.
And David Johnson, who plays Frank Fisher, has a lot to do with that. He's a super talented young actor, and like everybody else in the film, we were lucky to have him on the cast and doing a great job. And Clark Peters, who plays Adam Clayton Powell, is someone you instantly recognize if you watch American TV or film. And he was just a terrific, magnetic, charismatic sort of mentor,
Hmm.
and another great actor. But of course, I can't say anything about our acting without mentioning our lead, Jonas Dassler, who's this dazzling young German actor playing Bonhoeffer. He was, when we were watching the auditions, he was everyone's immediate and first choice and only choice to play that role. So you'll be seeing more of him in years to come. I'm lucky we got to kind of feature him first.
Congratulations. He did a great job indeed. I thought one of the other things, knowing a little bit about Bonhoeffer's history coming into the film, I was looking forward to see how it would be portrayed and his affection for the church in America. And I'd forgotten that it was Harlem, that it was a black church. And I thought that was really portrayed well, and it really came across because obviously he was conflicted about, his desires and his close family knit relationships and going back to his homeland.
Yeah.
I thought it was ironic. What are your thoughts on how, Nazi Germany's uh, philosophy was very Aryan race, and here he was settling into and befriending and becoming family with a black race, and
Yeah.
that certainly, you're thinking of the 32 Olympics, that certainly flew in the face of the Nazi socialism mindset.
Oh,
Um,
very much so. Yeah. Yeah, and I think one reason why it was important to showcase that Harlem experience is not only to show Bonhoeffer sort of uh, tuning into the idea that part of living out your faith would mean fighting for the victims of injustice, which is what he committed his life to when he went back to Germany, but also showing how, the roots of that were in watching Americans fight against their own injustice. So I think it's a great unifying element in the story, and makes it, I think, relevant for any viewer at any time in history. There are always people around us who are being ground down under some boot heel, and it's part of our job to comfort and even fight on their behalf.
I mean, originally, had hoped to interview you before the film had come out. Now that it's after the film, I'm not as afraid of featuring any spoilers. That one scene where you just described, where his friend took him to a hotel to show him the injustice that was going on, and that hotel innkeeper pulls out a shotgun, and the way he
Yeah.
treated them, and he struck him, um, it was horrific and very emotional. And as a cinematographer, director, just as an artist, you did a great job presenting that. It was very impactful to me
Yeah,
and
thank
anybody
you.
watching that.
Yeah, it's you want to try to find moments like that that really crystallize the story and really compel you during those moments to kind of realize what's going on. And that's one of those things that I think really does it, drives it home. So yeah, kudos to everyone in that scene. It was really there were many moments during the film where I think it was kind of emotionally challenging for the actors. There's one scene where you'll remember the encounter at the Swiss border
Yeah.
when Bonhoeffer and his brother-in-law are trying to deliver a truckload of Jewish refugees to Switzerland, and there's a wonderful scene where Bonhoeffer is showing the Swiss guards the tattoo, the concentration camp tattoo on the arm of one of the refugees. And while we were shooting that scene, there was this very tender exchange between Jonas Dassler, a German, playing Bonhoeffer, and the actor playing Moishe, the Jewish man. And uh, Jonas just saying, expressing what a powerful moment that was for him as a German, given the backdrop of the story, and the actor playing Moishe, responding in kind. It's just there were some lovely moments like that during the movie where there was a kind of story being played out behind the story that I think really lends a richness and an extra dimension to the acting and to the story itself.
That's powerful. I'm curious, how much do you think in your research for this film, how much do you think the Swiss in general knew about what was going on? You referenced the tattoo and what that might mean if a Swiss guard saw that.
Yeah, it's a good question. We live in a world where communication is instantaneous and very distributed. Anybody can go on Twitter and find out what's happening with the LA fires right now, for example, and you'll see, firsthand accounts and clips of people's homes on fire, that sort of thing. It was a very different world back in World War II. Information was tightly controlled. There might be one national newspaper and maybe a radio station that you got your news from. And those were, of course, heavily censored during wartime. So I suspect that people had heard rumors, from travelers, and maybe got some accounts from their front page papers. But it was very late in the war before the United States even admitted that they were aware that there were concentration camps with Jews in them, and that the Nazis were systematically exterminating Jews. And so I don't know. I'm not really sure the extent to which the Swiss would have known. Perhaps being in the military would have given the border guards a leg up, information-wise. But it's always hard to say. We have 2020 hindsight on that era, and we sort of sometimes assume everybody knew what was going on everywhere else. But that really wasn't the case, even on the Allies' side. So, uh, one of the things about Bonhoeffer that's so remarkable is that he was, as soon as Nazism sort of, you know, reared its ugly head in Germany back in the early 30s, he was on them and preaching against them and writing about them and organizing the church against them. He was not a Johnny come lately to the fight against fascism. He was mixing it up with them from the very beginning. So Bonhoeffer certainly had good information. His family was very prominent in Germany. His uncle ran the sort of National Guard of Berlin, as it were, sort of the defensive forces in that city. So he had a lot of good sources of information. And of course, the church was very plugged into what was going on. And there was a split in the church over whether to work with the Nazis and try to accommodate them or fight against them. And he fortunately chose the latter side and helped organize the Confessing Church to break away from the state church and oppose it on moral grounds.
That's fascinating. One of the things I started wondering about when I was watching the film was some of the parallels I felt in, the whole thing of like, this can never happen again, and
No.
how subtly and deceptively it can happen, and how people are swept into it. And I thought of our current situation and different sides of the aisle that uh, people talk about administrations as being fascist and whatnot. How intentional was that to include that? Was it accidental, or did you back off some? What were the thoughts on how some people could be familiar with some of these thoughts and suspicions of something insidious creeping in
Yeah.
slowly but surely?
Oh, I think yeah, I mean, I think there are parallels all around us. And I think everybody who sees the film comes away thinking that it resonates in our time in a particular way. I can tell you that the filmmakers, we have different perspectives among the producers on, which kind of authoritarianism the movie is really speaking to in the current moment. We had lots of people saying, "Oh, well, this is Trump dog whistle, movie, and the fascism you're talking about is, Harris Walls." I had a woman come up to me after a screening for a Jewish audience to say, "Thank you so much for making this very important anti-Trump film." So, we had it's sort of a Rashomon in that, you can kind of read what you want into it. And I think that's going to be true forever. As long as this film is being watched by audiences, they're going to see something in their world that they want to resist. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, I think authoritarianism exists across the political spectrum. You can be a right-wing authoritarian, you can be a left-wing authoritarian, and I think it's always important to stand up against those power centers on behalf of their victims. In fact, and this is purely a personal perspective, but I look at what's going on in the UK today with attempts by the establishment there to suppress the recent interest in the grooming gang crisis that's taken place in many cities across that country. And I look at the attempts by the current government to sort of squash that discussion and stop attention being paid to the victims of those grooming gangs. And to me, that's if Bonhoeffer were there now, I'd like to think he'd be speaking up on behalf of those victims and against the government. Again, that's just me, but I think we're going to be facing situations like that, in many different countries around the world for years to come. It's just a kind of timeless human battle. And I don't think that Bonhoeffer, if he had been born in, Russia in the early 1900s, or in China in the middle of last century, I hope he would have been fighting against the powers that were back then. And I think he would have.
Yeah. I'm curious as to how you and your fellow directors wrestled with the whole thought of pacifism versus injustice and standing up against injustice, and that whole conflict, kind of seeped into the movie, I'm sure intentionally. And so, what are some of your thoughts on that, and what are
Yeah.
some of the thoughts people interjected and when you were formulating your ideas and where to go with this?
Yeah, well, we sort of began this process back in it's 2013, and that was before nobody that you would have identified as being a potential target of the film was on the scene at that point. Trump wasn't even a twinkle in the political eye, and certainly Keir Starmer as prime minister in the UK, or Kamala Harris as the Democrat nominee. None of the current political actors really on the scene. So we didn't set out with an agenda in that area. We just knew that we loved the idea of Bonhoeffer standing up against the sort of god of government of his day, and fighting on behalf of its victims, and that was what we stayed true to, all through the development and writing of the story. So I think that's one reason why this movie is going to be timeless. We didn't draft it to uh, take on a political agenda of any kind. We just wanted to show a kind of classic struggle between the powerful and the powerless, and how one man can make a difference in that struggle. And I think that's what we've got here, is a classic and timeless film with that message.
I think you nailed it, and I think it's funny that it's ironic that a timeless film is made on a specific time period piece.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there were lots of folks in Germany in particular, and members of the Bonhoeffer family who thought that we were trying to send a right-wing dog whistle with this movie, and they kind of came out and complained about it. But I don't think that's accurate at all. I don't think you can look at critical reviews of our film, analysis of our film from people who understand that era and Bonhoeffer's time, who've said, no, this isn't this isn't a left-wing film, it's not a right-wing film, it's just a film about a guy who stood up against evil, and and that's really where I think we'd all like to leave it as filmmakers. You'll put your own interpretation on it as an audience, of course, but we just wanted to tell Bonhoeffer's story as best we could, and I think we've done that. And I think his life and his words are powerful enough to speak for themselves, and I think they do a good job. And I'm delighted that we've had a chance to share that Bonhoeffer with the world.
Me too. Thank you for kind of elevating and magnifying a hero in our in the time in the previous generation. You had some great music and some great scenery and sets to work from. What can you tell me about how you acquired both of those very essential parts of the film?
Sure. Well, the process of picking the locations was a collaborative one, obviously, but ultimately, in kind of a funny way, and this is the business side of show business. One of the things you have to do as a filmmaker when you're planning your budget is there are various jurisdictions around the world where you sometimes are drawn to shoot because they have great tax incentives. And we picked two countries that did, Belgium and Ireland, and that's why we shot the film there. The incentives made up a significant part of our budget, and it was money that we didn't have to borrow or raise from equity investors. It's just sort of free money that you get from the government for shooting the film there. And it turned out to be a great choice. Belgium is beautiful. Ireland is spectacular as well, as you can imagine. And we were there in the winter. We started shooting in November and wrapped in January, so it was not always comfortable or fun shooting in those countries during those seasons. But it was, the interiors, the exteriors, the countryside. I mean, it was all just magical, really, really beautiful. And the interiors as well, the churches. Yeah, the church where Bonhoeffer gives his sermon is a church called St. Finbarr's in Cork, Ireland, and that was a beautiful location. But we shot a lot of the scenery, including all of the Harlem stuff, was shot in Belgium. So we made the best use of both locations, and I think you're right. I think it really comes through as a beautiful film, and you get both these kind of intimate interior shots. The communion scenes at the end were all filmed in an Irish house in the middle of Tipperary, I think.
Wow.
But you also have these expansive outside views and cinematic shots of war footage and travel that I think a lot of that was done in Belgium. The Swiss scene was done in Belgium. So yeah, I'm recalling fondly our time in those countries, and it was an amazing experience. The Belgian crews, Irish crews were great, and yeah, it was really fun.
Awesome. I want to be respectful of your time, so I want to kind of wrap up here. What would you want to tell me about the music
Oh
for
gosh.
the film?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have very talented composers, contributions from a lot of folks in the score. I think you're right. It's one of the joys of watching the film, from the dailies, that are being shot and shared on set, to the early, rough cuts, and then watching those evolve into the final version of the film, is hearing the music evolve. It adds so much depth and so much emotional resonance to the picture. And I think our crowning achievement in that regard was uh, getting Lauren Daigle to agree to contribute her song, Then I Will, to the soundtrack. And it really just, we've had so many reports of, men crying in the bathroom, and, people sitting through the whole credits and just sitting in silence after the lights go up. I think part of that emotional impact is her song. And just delighted to have her contribution to the film. But there's this sort of feedback where the emotional power of the visual images feeds into the emotional resonance of the music, and vice versa. And I do think we have a terrific soundtrack and a terrific contribution by the composers and by Ms. Daigle, all the way across. I can't say enough good things about the music for the film.
And lastly, I don't think it's really a spoiler because people that know Bonhoeffer know his story that he died a martyr. Uh, what went into choosing how to portray that?
Oh, such a struggle. Ultimately, we decided to do a very faithful and realistic version of his death. There was a lot of research that went into, well, what would the scaffolding have looked like? How would it have happened? Oh yeah, our set designer, did a deep dive into how did these executions happen? What was involved? And it's this very kind of simple, stark um, uh, method that they used. There are some accounts that Bonhoeffer died naked. They just stripped him of his clothes before they hanged him. We didn't show that, obviously. But the really impactful part, I think, is what happens right before he dies, the communion scene, the Nazi corporal Knobloch being invited into that very intimate moment, and I think that's it's one of the emotional highlights of the film, that communion scene just before he's let out to be executed. And again, that's all credit to Todd Komernicki, our screenwriter and director, and to Jonas Dassler for just being such a luminous version of Bonhoeffer, and being somehow able to convey Bonhoeffer's spiritual state, right at that moment. It really is a remarkable cinematic achievement, I think, and I think in some ways the highlight of the film.
Well, kudos again to you and all of your coworkers on this film. Is
Thank
there
you.
anything else that you'd like to share about the film? Sometimes I know doing interviews, you have in mind a couple of things that you want to inject in there. So if I haven't asked the right question, here's your chance to.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one thing that comes through in the film is you wanted to shoot this as a movie that would be accessible to and appealing to general audiences. And so one of the things that I think we did was we made a beautiful piece of art, not just a story about a faithful Christian or a story that really portrays the gospel in a multidimensional way. But we made a movie that you can be proud to recommend to your friends and family. And we're the first movie in the history of Angel Studios as our distributor to have gotten 100% positive reviews from the top reviewers that saw our film. And oftentimes with what I would call faith films or faith-oriented films, you get a really high audience score, but you get a lot of kind of Rotten Tomatoes from the critics, so to speak. And I think we're blessed to have very positive critical reviews as well as a very positive audience score on Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb. So it was a crowd pleaser, a cinema score, very well received film by our target audiences, but also a film that I think filmmakers and critics and those in the industry watch and think, this is really well done. And I'm just proud to be associated with a film of such quality. And I think that's one reason to see it is because it's just a good movie. Whatever you think about the man or his message, it's just a good film, and it'll be enjoyable for anybody just on that level.
Well, excellent job, my friend.
Thank you, Doug.
You
Appreciate your
betcha.
time. Yeah,
Likewise.
great talking to you.
Good talking to you. Take care.
You too.